Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kira Parrott, Director of Darien Library, and I want to thank all of you for joining us for our special event tonight. I know our virtual attendees are still filtering in, so as you get settled and you log in and maybe get a glass of wine or whatever to relax with tonight's event, I have just a few housekeeping notes and thank you notes before I introduce our guest authors. So first, tonight's event is a Zoom webinar. So that means that you, the virtual audience, can see and hear the speakers, but the speakers cannot see or hear you. Your webcams are not enabled, so you don't need to worry about that. However, you can comment or ask questions using the chat feature, which is located down at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're going to be saving a little bit of time at the end of tonight's conversation to answer some of your questions for our author. So you can ask those questions at any time in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that to surface those questions to our authors toward the end. Also, a big thank you to our co-sponsor for this evening's event, our fantastic local independent bookstore, Barrett Bookstore. We encourage you to visit Barrett's in person if you can, located just down the road from the library on 6 Corbin Drive, or anytime online at barrettbookstore.com. And as always, a huge debt of gratitude to all of the friends of Darien Library. It is your generosity that directly supports all of our collections and our programming, including our Zoom licensing, which has been critical over the past year as we've implemented amazing events like tonight online. And also hat tip to our tech support this evening, Karen Alfini, our senior tech assistant who keeps all the digital things running smoothly in the back end of all of our virtual events. Thank you, Karen. And now it is my great privilege to introduce our guest authors. Paula McLain is a New York Times bestselling novelist. Many readers in Darien are likely very familiar with her works, The Paris Wife, which was and continues to be among the most popular books in town. Her other works include Circling the Sun and Love and Ruin, all of which are immersive, adventure-filled, and romantic works of historical fiction. Her latest book, which just came out on April 13th, When the Stars Go Dark, is an atmospheric, heart-wrenching tale of contemporary suspense. Paula lives in Ohio with her family. And in conversation with Paula this evening is none other than Lisa Gardner, no stranger to the suspense genre. Lisa is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of more than 20 thrilling suspense novels, including The Neighbor, which won the Thriller of the Year award, and the absolutely unputdownable Before She Disappeared. Lisa lives in New Hampshire with her family. Paula, Lisa, thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Lisa, I just can't thank you enough for agreeing to be in conversation with me and part of my book tour. You are a force of nature in the publishing world and in this particular genre. And so it's just a thrill and an honor, and it's an honor and a thrill to be back in Darien, even though it's virtual and not physical, but I feel like I have a lot of friends in Darien and I've had some unbelievable events there in the past. So thanks to Barrett's Books and thanks to the library, and hopefully you're about to have a fun evening. I certainly have been really looking forward to it. So.
Well, it is a huge pleasure to be here. You are one of my favorite authors, Paula, and I absolutely loved When the Stars Go Dark. And I think we can both agree one of the most fun parts of our jobs is this opportunity to get to talk with other authors, to get to interact with our readers. And, thank heavens for Zoom and our libraries and our local independent bookstores for making these events happen, because otherwise the last year would have been just way too long for all of us. So thank you.
Brutal and brutal. Yeah, this is a really humane way to do a bookstore if we can't, right, interact with our readers and have one-on-one FaceTime and signing lines. We can at least have this, which feels rich and rewarding and human. So yeah, happy to see your face.
I don't know how many readers know, but writing has a tendency to be actually a rather small world. And generally for people like you and I, Paula, who've been around for a bit between conferences and this and that, your paths have crossed. But this is my first time getting to speak with you, and I'm very excited for that. I mean, it's still fun. I still think one of the best parts of our job is still opening up that amazing book and being swept away and then getting to meet the author in person, be like, I love your work. We're all just fangirls. We really are.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It is sort of odd that our paths haven't crossed. And I don't even know that we have friends of friends. I mean, if we were sitting in a hotel bar somewhere, like, right, we probably would discover that we have friends of friends. But yeah, but I've been a huge admirer of your work. And I think in particular, this latest novel and my latest novel do share some DNA. They're
Yes.
not unalike. So I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. Let's talk about When the Stars Go Dark, because what an actually very powerful, immersive is one of the words I like the best, because there's lots of suspense out there, tons of suspense out there, but this book really has heart. It really draws you in. We're in 1993. We have a detective who's clearly gone through a huge trauma, an expert in finding missing children, when she, for abrupt traumatic purposes, has to leave her family, ends up in the town of her youth where another 15-year-old girl has disappeared. Walk us through When the Stars Go Dark. Why this story for you?
Yeah. So as you know, it's a radical change in genre for me, which was not planned. And in fact, the idea scared me to death when it first appeared on a dog walk one day when I was deep in the middle of writing my third historical novel, Love and Ruin. And so this character came to me, this detective character who becomes obsessed with a missing girl. And it's not a original storyline. I mean, it's the storyline in your latest novel as well. But I just right away understood what they were carrying. I understood the heart of the novel, their connection. Anna, as a detective, shares some of my past. So she grew up in foster care, like I did. And that experience, her childhood trauma, makes her particularly susceptible to the siren calls of those who are disenfranchised, the voiceless, the deeply troubled and in trouble. And she can't help herself. She's she's beside herself. She's obsessed. And so that's really the book. It's about how she recognizes the victim, this 15-year-old missing girl whose poster she sees the day she arrives in her childhood town, and why they connect, why their destinies intertwined, why they might be fated to meet and to not save each other, but help each other save themselves, I suppose. And Mendocino, which is the town that Anna goes to escape this traumatic event in her personal life as the novel begins, is the place where she feels most at home in the world, although her concept of home is very difficult, just like mine was growing up. But it's
You
where
have one of my all-time favorite lines in this novel. You say, Anna says, I've had too many mothers and not enough mothering.
oh
I feel
dear.
like that just captured so much of what you were doing with this book. It sounds like a bit of your own experience.
Yes, no, and yeah, that was a Barbara Walters moment right there. I just looked into your eyes. Yeah, my therapist would have some things to say about that as well. Yeah, that is my story. I've had too many mothers and not enough mothering. And, it wasn't obvious to me when I had this idea, Lisa, that the book would become as personal as it has ended up being. Like I said, it just had this idea of a detective character, of the victim that she encounters, and the setting. And all of that seemed very wedded together, but I didn't know where the book was going to take me. And entirely new genre with conventions. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I just had to dive in and let the story take me where it was going to go. And then when I was working on the character, and we always have to have backgrounds, right? The character has to be a person. It's not just the propulsive page turning stuff, but who is this person and why should we care about them? And when I got to these moments describing what Anna was carrying, more and more, I began to realize that, in fact, she was carrying a lot of what I was carrying. And that's my connection to her and my connection to the world of the book, and why it feels like this book is not only deeply personal to me as a writer, but important to me. I feel like the story at the heart of it is an important story to tell.
So this book is a departure for you. You've had The Paris Wife, historicals, poetry. You've written a lot of really amazing things. But as you say, this was your first, it's a thriller, but it's also a police procedural. Your attention to detail is amazing, because that's certainly something I look for.
Yeah.
Did you set out explicitly thinking, okay, if I'm writing a suspense novel, I have to learn the genre? Or is it a much more organic process? This is the story I'm trying to tell, and these are the things I need to know, because my character, Anna, has to know how to, what's the procedure for finding missing kids. How
No.
did that work for you?
Yeah. So some of it is the same as when I was writing my historicals, because I would have a character, I would have a world, and then I would let my imagination sort of propel me into that world. And then I would come to a place where I needed to know something, like how to be a racehorse trainer in, 1920s Kenya, or what bullfighting is like, or how to make absinthe, or whatever. And then I would do a bunch of research to catch up to that moment in the story. But here, it's not just the procedural stuff, right? It's everything. It's the conventions. It's how to plant clues, and how to have red herrings, and how to delay awareness, but then make sure that you've built it up enough so that readers don't feel like they're being tricked at the end. And so all of that, I have to say, was really humbling for me as a writer. There was a lot to learn and many drafts along the way. The research was a huge part of it. I decided not to read a bunch of suspense because I was afraid of being bogged down, but I wanted to read kind of the kinds of suspense novels that were doing what I wanted to do. I wanted to write an atmospheric book that was very much of a particular place and time. And I wanted to write a character-driven book. I think because I was afraid of writing a procedural, and now everybody watches these CSI things like eats it like Oreo cookies, right? So they believe that they can solve crimes themselves with their own laptops, right? So I didn't want to compete with those readers. So I decided to set the novel in 1993. I
love the attention to detail, because when you go to set a book, in a different time period where you're contemporary, but you're not contemporary.
Right.
You've got to continue to communicate that. And I noticed just the specificity, like there's not just a magnet on the refrigerator. It's, what was it? It was a Hamburglar magnet.
Hamburglar, yeah.
I have to say, I'm of the age. I'm like, I remember that.
Or like a Duran Duran poster on the wall.
Yes, the Duran. Absolutely.
Speakers on the radio, or like little things that sort of knit it together. And of course, this is, I think we're about the same age. I don't know, Lisa, I'm 55, but this
Close
is
enough. Yep.
close enough. So this was a really easy world for me to access in terms of salient detail, unlike the 1920s or the 1930s, or the Spanish Civil War, or what have you. But setting it in 1993 afforded me some other things too, not just being able to reach for details, but I really
Not just the Hamburglar.
not just the Hamburglar, exactly. I wanted it to be before DNA testing, and before criminal profiling, and before the internet really blew up, and even before cell phones, because I wanted my characters to talk to each other. Like I wanted the dialogue to be a thing that really drove the story. And because I wanted Anna Hart, my detective character, to be reliant on her instinct, her intuition, and
Yeah.
her gut. To me, that's more interesting as a reader and as a writer. Connecting to her, right?
I have to say, because I'm a big fan of the character-driven suspense, when I was writing my latest book before she disappeared, I did the non-traditional, like the amateur sleuth that doesn't have any forensics background and only has a flip phone, so she can't. I'm with you. It's not as much fun when you can just Google it, or, there's a strand of hair that tells you, oh, it was the guy who lived, 5 doors down. Having to go through the process, we call it now social engineering, but talking, interacting. You talk a lot. You have fabulous research in this novel, everything from interviewing techniques, because of course, this is very important to Anna, where there's not some magic crime lab giving her the answer, but also in particular, and, very heartbreaking for those of us who were there, you talk about a very specific case, the Polly Klaus case. How did all of this work? You have wonderful details, access to information. Talk us through how you put
Yeah.
all of this together.
Right. So thank you. So at the center of the book, there are real missing persons cases. So there's a true crime aspect to the novel. And
Absolutely.
it was not a plan of mine
Oh,
anymore than it was a plan for me to have my character grow up in foster care, or to have my victims, survive some of the traumas that I have had to survive. It just developed. It just kind of organically grew into this thing. So to get to the bottom of a character and to get the voice right and the veracity and a sense of authority, you're a detective as a novice, but mine's an expert. So I needed that authority. And so once I had set the time period, I decided to do some research one day. I was looking for a kind of authenticity of voice, and I just happened to stumble on, although we know that the universe doesn't do random, so maybe I didn't just happen to stumble on it, but a podcast where a retired FBI agent was interviewing Eddie Fryer, who is the lead FBI detective on the Polly Klaus case. So I'm just listening, I'm taking notes, I'm doing a bunch of other things at the same time. I was only half paying attention. And I had already set my novel in the late fall. And, I had 3/4 of a draft by the time I made this decision to set it
oh,
in
interesting.
1993.
That's late in the game.
Yes. So here I am listening, and Eddie Fryer says about Polly Klaus. So if you don't remember the case, she's a 12-year-old girl who was abducted from her bedroom, kidnapped at knife point, um, while in the middle of a slumber party, while her two 12-year-old
Yeah.
friends. And just brutal. Um, and he's talking about the case, and he's like, October 1st, 1993 is the night that Polly Klaus was abducted in Petaluma, which is 60 miles away from my town of Mendocino, where Anna Hart is. And it's 10 days after my imaginary victim disappeared. 60 miles away, 10 days. It was too specific, and it was
Yeah.
too close. And I just had that feeling, that spidey sense that there was a reason why I was learning this. And it was contemporary, even though I'm writing an imaginary character's experience in this world with other imaginary characters. This was really happening in 1993. And suddenly it seemed imperative to me to tell the truth about that the families of these victims endured unspeakable moments, and the grief and the loss and the despair. And yes, I have the privilege of telling a story, but for many, it's not a story. It's true. And it started to feel like a really important, and I said this word early, like an important story to tell, and to be as historically accurate, even though it's only 1993, of that experience. And it offered me an opportunity to also talk about, polycloss it was the first time the internet was ever used in a missing persons case. So that's super interesting to me. And also it allows my character, Anna, to wonder why, suddenly she's on, national news and she's America's child and thousands of volunteers are out looking for her. Meanwhile, other children are disappearing every day who aren't even reported.
I
You know,
think great
all of the
fiction
children.
always tells the truth.
Yeah.
And you did this great job of summarizing, why don't we treat all our missing children equally? Shouldn't we want to find them all? Shouldn't everyone matter? I mean, certainly this is a theme I've played around in some of my own novels, but
Exactly.
you hit upon a very practical and unfortunately kind of timeless aspect to this, the sensational nature of Polly Klaus's kidnapping, but the fact that you knew it was a kidnapping. When for so many, like poor Cameron, our 15-year-old missing girl in When the Stars Go Dark, did she run away or was she kidnapped? And just having to start a case with that level of doubt right there just makes it so much harder to get that same level of energy, police attention, national exposure, even though in the end of the day, this too might be a kidnapping. Who did you consult with or who you're working with to kind of get all these ins and outs of how, the pragmatic details of searching for missing children?
Right. So I was lucky enough to make contact with a detective. And again, it was kind of a fluky connection, a friend of a friend that just felt, after all, um, just fated. I was fated to meet her. She's absolutely amazing. She's retired now. Her name is Marianne Flintstutz, and she is strangely exactly the same age as my imaginary detective and came up in the early 1990s as a detective working on sensitive crimes. And she just had that and is a woman working in a man's world in a small town. And she just really helped me and was patient with me and answered a million questions and just helped me physicalize Anna's experience. So it's an embodied experience, right? What happens when you open a trunk and discover a victim that's been there for 3 or 4 months? Like, what's the physical experience of that? And then what's the emotional experience of that? I remember in an early draft, I had Anna having a huge reaction when that particular moment happens in the
Yeah.
story. And Marianne read a draft and she's like, I just want you to know that most detectives, but essentially most women detectives, are going to be way more compartmentalized than that
Yes.
in that moment. And the women, and it's a line that I've worked into the book now too, with her permission. She's like, women are strong, female detectives are strong because they have to be. Right.
Yes.
Usually it's the men around who are dropping like flies.
But I thought you did a really nice job too. That one of Anna's strengths, being female, is she's also better at trusting her intuition. And when you're dealing with missing persons cases, when you're interviewing parents and the teenage friends of the 15-year-old, this
Right.
instinct really does guide you. And you've paired her with a former flame and, now I want to call him the sheriff of the town.
Sheriff, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
he
absolutely.
wants the tangible. He wants the stuff he can. And Anna's almost trying to bring him along. That's not really how these cases work a lot. It's a bit by
Mhm.
feel.
Yeah, he's a sort of by the book kind of guy, and she's a maverick, very unconventional, definitely follows her hunches,
Yes.
and and that makes her interesting to me.
I think
And
it also makes her successful. And I really like seeing that again, some of these natural aspects of her personality really are what it takes to do this kind
yeah.
of work.
One thing I wanted to mention though, when you were talking about your detective earlier being a novice, Frankie Elkin is the name of the detective in Before She Disappeared. And one thing you let her do is she learns, right? She has to fail sometimes. She can make mistakes. And I think that sometimes, particularly in this genre, there's a reluctance to let the protagonist fail and to not know things. You know, you watch these crime shows, right? The way we all do. And there's a certain satisfaction to these characters being right, like all the time. They just know things. It's like, well, and they just rattle it off. Well, it's the blah, 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 this blood spatter pattern. And, and they just know everything. But as humans, we just don't, we don't. We feel our way along and we make mistakes. And when we are, take the risk to write a character who doesn't know everything and who is flawed and human, they are then instantly more relatable to the
I'll
reader.
agree. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't get me wrong, because I love to watch the crime shows. It's pretty much, I watch way too many crime shows, but I still prefer to read crime fiction for exactly the reason you're talking about. In crime fiction and suspense novels, the characters have a tendency to be more real, relatable. Like you said, you get to see them in their moments of weakness, which generally is not going to be when the lights are on them. But again, we know Anna's dealing with a lot of trauma in this book. You do a beautiful job of threading through what all is going on with her. And in this town itself, and I love this element, let's talk about this, the trauma of the community. Because in Mendocino, this isn't the first kidnapping they've had also.
Exactly.
And anytime you have this kind of major disappearance, this kind of threat to your neighbors in a small town where you're supposed to feel safe, it really inflicts a scar on the psyche of everyone.
That is just really beautifully said. Thank you. So part of Anna's backstory, her childhood, is that there was a disappearance of a childhood friend of hers in 1972. And this recent disappearance is so reminiscent of that Anna and Will, who was also around at the time, can't help but wonder how this town can possibly survive another
Yes.
girl, and what if it turns out the same as the other, which is it's a horrible, I'm not gonna spoiler alert, but so the town is carrying a trauma, a collective trauma that they haven't quite healed from. They've moved on, but they haven't forgotten it. And here's something: when I decided to put Polyclos and other historical victims, true, real victims in the center of this novel, then it opened the door, right? So that when I was writing about Anna's backstory, I did a little more research, and there were, in 1972, between 1971 and 1973, in this same geographical area, a string of unsolved
I
abductions
wondered
of
about
young
that.
women. So
Yeah.
it's historical, unsolved historical abductions between 1971 and 1973 in this same area. It was the Santa Rosa hitchhiker killer. And so I made Anna's childhood friend potentially one of the victims of this, And so the town, you're right, is struggling with this trauma and wondering how they're ever going to recover. Anna and Will are remembering that trauma. They're still living with it. And they're also trying to live through the demands of the present, right? And with a victim who is quite surely in peril. And it's a race against time, and the same, it's all the stuff it usually is, except there's this freight. And I'm really interested in how we heal individually and collectively when the worst happens. If you think about it, Lisa, trauma and tragedy are completely ordinary. They happen all the time, right? Natural disasters and car accidents and abductions and suicides and drug overdoses. I mean, it touches our lives and punctures, our experience in all these ways. So it's ordinary, it happens every day, and it's also extraordinary in that it changes us in a moment and we're never the same again. And I'm interested in that vector, I guess.
So one of the things I really loved about this book is clearly you have a lot of tension and conflict. You have a past, crime that have really impacted this town. You have a current 15-year-old girl who's disappeared. You have a detective who we know something terrible has happened and she's trying to sort that out. So we have a lot of conflict, tension, deep, dark thoughts. If you had just done that, this would have been a great crime thriller, but it would have been a very, very different read. I thought you did a beautiful job of balancing it with, well, then what does give this community and what does give Anna hope? And to
Mm.
that end, to me, you kind of delivered little presents to her and the reader.
Mm.
One very much takes the form of her foster parents, and in particular, Hap, and what he taught her about nature and the cycles of nature, her place in the world through nature, and how that also gives strength to herself. I mean, you certainly, with the way you're writing it, you sound like you know the woods very well, which I'll have to say is my happy place.
Growing up in Oregon, I imagine that that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So Hap is one of my favorite characters, and he was
Mine
just a gift. Just a gift to
too.
the universe. He just sort of appeared and had things to say to Anna. And so Anna arrives in Mendocino as a 10-year-old who's had a lot of loss and displacement and chaos
Yes.
and abandonment and just and violence and grief. And here she's presented with another set of foster parents, and instead of what she's used to, she gets these people who happen to be kind and nurturing and in a surprising way. So Hap is a forest ranger, and he's a survivalist expert that knows how to do all of this stuff, build fires and shelters and read the woods. And he feels about nature that it's a kind of medicine. And he gives this to Anna. Like that is, you're right, it's a present, essentially. It's a gift that Hap gives Anna. And he also takes her as she is. There's a line in the book where Anna says about Hap that he understood her right away, and how to talk to her was survivor to survivor. So Anna has had to survive a lot, but he gives her these tools, and it helps increase her confidence, her self-confidence, and it helps her understand how to trust her inner voice and how to rely on herself, tools that will come in handy really for the rest of her life, but definitely in this case, this particular case, finding this particular missing girl.
Now, I have to say I'm biased towards animals, just not only my real life where I have rescue dogs.
I know where this is going.
Yeah. So I have to say, one of my absolute favorite characters in the book also is Cricket. And I
Cricket.
love how that relationship, this kind of unexpected companion, source of comfort, and what that has meant for Anna. How did Cricket come to be?
So Cricket is a real dog. Cricket is an actual dog. She's my dear friend's sister's dog. And I met her doing a book event in Pasadena. And I just had this moment with Cricket. And I just thought, this an amazing dog. This dog belongs in a book. And so I made the dog a promise that I would put her in this book. And I did put her in the book. And what I love about Cricket, first of all, dogs make everything better. My personal dog, my dog Piper, makes everything better. And there's a Piper in your book, which I thought was really funny. But
Well, to make it funnier, Piper exists in real life too and is my neighbor's cat. So I think if you bring the pets to a novelist,
see,
they're
we
going to
might
be
never have met, but there are worlds within worlds here. So it's funny. So what I love about this particular dog is that she teaches Anna that she really does need help, that she won't admit that she needs,
a
and
partner.
yeah, a
Cricket,
partner, exactly. And it softens her and it opens her to a little more vulnerability and trust. She doesn't trust people, but she trusts nature, and she learns to trust this dog. And it's a really nice moment for her. I love their kind of connection, that she is surprised how quickly she adapts to having this animal around. And if you've never had a dog and then suddenly do, you'll find that is the experience. It's like they've always been there, and they really do seem to pick us instead of the other way
I
around.
thought that was
We don't
very,
really choose them. They kind of choose us, and
yes.
for the better, I think.
I love that line.
Yeah.
And then there's another character I thought that really was interesting too, because not just what she brought to the novel, but was, I also thought, very real world. When you start talking to detectives, I'm doing some research right now about wilderness rescues and searching people.
Fun. I'm already interested.
Yeah, psychics inevitably play a role. Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting if you talk to detectives, and I was talking about, wilderness SAR, and they're like, there's always a psychic. You will always get a call. It's just like one of the truisms. And
Yeah.
while some people aren't as sure, many of them will say, you'd be surprised that sometimes that actually seems to be some significant source of information, which
Yeah.
brings us to Tally, who, of
Yeah.
course, we well, the sheriff not so sure about. Again, one of those things he can't see and touch. But, Anna's experience has been different, and Tally's just an amazingly warm. I just adored her. I want her to exist in real life so we can bring her home.
No, she's one of my favorite characters too. And so if you're a skeptic out there as a reader, know that I too have some skepticism about whatever, knowing the future, being able to predict things that we can't see or any of that. But I would also say, and I'll bet this is true for you, Lisa, that things have happened in your rational life that don't seem rational.
Yeah.
Strange synchronicities or fluky things or occurrences that you can't quite explain. And then there are people who seem to have dreams that may or may not feel slightly prophetic. And so Anna's foster mother, Eden, is one of those who is just kind of a little bit sensitive, which opens her a little to the idea of the Tally character, who is a psychic medium, who gets messages in dreams. And yet I really didn't want, Lisa, for Tally to solve anything for Anna. I didn't want her to know something that Anna doesn't know. And so really their relationship is, as women, kind of seeing and understanding each other in a really interesting way. And Tally is another character like Hap, who tells Anna that she can trust her instincts, that she can trust the tools that she has on board. In a way, I think of Tally as much more of a therapist than she really
Yes.
is a psychic. And it allows for a kind of depth of, I don't know, of dialogue that allows or challenges even Anna to be vulnerable and to start to have her own, what I want to say, her walls kind of come down a little bit, and she lets down her guard enough so that Tally can kind of sense what she's actually dealing with and what she's carrying. And that's just a big kind of turning point in the book. And so I love the conversations that these women had. Another woman character in the book that I really love is the bartender at
Yes.
Patton's Pub,
Yep.
Wanda.
She's
Yeah,
another one of those. I would bring her home if I could.
too. Me too. Yeah, I love these women, and I love how they talk to each other, and I love how they draw out certain notes of each other's character. And yeah, it's fun, right?
It is, I think all great fiction, regardless of genre, has some truisms to it. And one of it is, whether you're writing about the Paris wife, a historical book, or whether you're writing about crime fiction, you're trying to write about a person discovering themselves, becoming who they need to be. And in this book, When the Stars Go Dark, I kind of saw Hap, and in particularly Tally, as almost like her spirit guides. Anna's coping strategy, which you establish right out of the gate, is she works. She is a workaholic. She just keeps moving. She'll never have to face what her life was. And by giving her these right characters along the way, you start to see her evolve. And I feel like that's the richness of fiction. That's the beauty of the story. This is what the crime book, shows don't give us, but you've done such a great job of here.
Oh, thank you. That actually was just really beautifully said, and a really generous way to see these characters. And I guess I have to agree with you. And if Anna, I don't know, you said earlier that yes, there's a lot of darkness in the book, but there is hope as
Yeah.
well. And one of the signposts of hope, and it comes through Tally, and it also comes through Hap in a way, is this idea that the things that happen to us are beyond our control,
Yeah.
obviously. And terrible things happen in a life. They simply do. It's just part of the story of being human. Um, Suffering comes to every human life, and yet it's counterproductive to push those things away, right? Sometimes we believe like that in order to move on, we need to basically close that door or slam it and then never look back. And I think what a character like Tally or Hap shows someone like Anna, who's carrying a lot, is that sometimes even our deepest sources of pain can lead us to our purpose.
And there's this absolutely beautiful scene when she's a little girl, kind of in Hap's trying to explain to her, bad things just do happen, but you
Yeah.
can always get through it. And she's just like, how? And he just takes her hand. And
Mm.
it's those simple things. There is nothing out there we cannot endure. And I think that message, particularly after the year everyone's had, is so
Yes.
amazingly positive. I mean, you
Yeah.
were writing this book probably, through at least part of the pandemic. I mean, how did that impact your message, your story, your writing process?
Yeah, so I was in edits, when the pandemic hit and on the verge of going into production. So I don't know how much of what's happened to us. It's almost like it was prescient, right?
Yeah.
Because but it's something I believe, honestly, Lisa. And thank you for pulling out that scene, because to me that is a moving scene, but it's also what I believe. How do we get through the things that life demands of us that are too much? How do we survive unsurvivable things together? Right?
Exactly.
We do it together. And by finding each other somehow in the darkest night. And this to me is what connects us so that we know we're absolutely not alone. And that in that way, we simply do survive. We do, even though we might not believe that we can. And that's what Anna, I think, learns by the end of this book, is that she's got a lot of hard work ahead of her, but she has now the belief that she's here for a reason. What's a more powerful, transformative message than that we're here for a reason and we're here to help each other? I think if there's
Yeah.
a distilled message at the center of the book, it's that healed people can heal people, and hurt people hurt people. And so, why not
Let's
be
talk
healed people?
let's talk about your writing process, because we've talked a lot about the books. And I know people always love to know, well, how are books made? So
Yeah. I'd love to hear about your process too. Will you answer that question?
I'll try, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure I have a process. So let's pick on you
Oh.
first.
Oh no, because that's where I'm at. Yeah,
So,
my process is messy and super
yeah.
intuitive and
How much
you know,
research do you do ahead of time, or do you plot? Do you pants? I like you better if you don't plot already.
yeah, I don't plot. I don't plot. I
Yay.
have no
Okay.
cards. I don't really know what I'm doing. And in fact, that's my favorite place to be, which I know sounds nutso, but there is something that feels so powerful and possible when you launch yourself over a cliff and you just have this voice and a thread of a story, and you're in that discovery place. I
I
love
like discovery.
Okay,
If I
discover.
always know what's going to happen next, I almost feel like I'm writing a book report. When I read, I want to discover, but when I'm writing, I also want to discover. It takes me a year to write a book. How about you?
Yeah, so it takes me a year to write a book and then another year to kind of really, to go back in and like rewrite it. Yeah, a year, I think Circling the Sun was a year cover to cover with the revision, but
Okay.
usually, yeah, between a year and 2 years, you're on a different schedule and you have an empire, and I'm still, finding my way. But I like that too. I really like learning
Well, I
new.
tell readers, I mean, if they're gonna, I mean, a book like yours, I mean, you can read this in one night. It's a page turner. I mean, you're so desperate to figure out what's going to happen. And poor Anna, but it's taken, you've spent 2 years with this. So you
Yeah.
need discovery, you need surprises, or it's in it for you for 2 years.
Yeah, I too think that, some of my research was particularly dark and that was sometimes difficult. I mean, right? Because we're reading this material that, isn't always easy to read, but there are these moments too for us when characters act out of kindness or generosity, or that those are the presents along the way. And I also think that coming to these moments of great surprise, like deciding, to set the book in 1993 and having everything change on a dime. And that's what keeps me interested, and just how powerful the imagination is as a force, right?
When
But
I was writing Before She Disappeared, which opens with the disappearance of a 15-year-old girl, but a
yeah,
Haitian girl from Mattapan, Boston. When I first did the research, I was focused on how you would find a teenage girl who's missing from inner city Boston. And one of the first things that came up was, how could she have disappeared in the first place? I mean, when you're in an urban environment, and this is contemporary, not 1993, so there's cell phones and cameras and witnesses and GPS tracking on everything from, geotagging on her social media to, everything on her cell phone. And I have to admit, I actually didn't know. I wrote like the first half of the novel, not actually knowing how she disappeared, but thinking I would figure it out when I got there.
love it. And I bet your readers absolutely love knowing that about you, like, because we don't have it all figured out. And how boring would it be? I don't want to be an expert. I want to be continually learning and growing, and letting myself throw it all out the window and start something new like this. I mean, I feel like the last few years have been some of the most exciting of my life, because I didn't know this was coming. Like, we never
Yeah.
really know what's coming for us, like, for better or for worse.
What's a day in the writing life? Walk us through like a typical day for Paula McLain.
Okay, I will answer this question if you will answer this question. And it was different for me before the pandemic. So I still have kids at home. I have a 14 and 16-year-old, and before the pandemic, they would wonderfully and magically go to school every day. And then there would be this pure, protected, my favorite moment. And I would close my office door and I wouldn't look at the dishes or wouldn't answer the phone. And, I'm like, Anna, I'm a workaholic, and I'll bet that you are too. But I love my work. I love just falling into the world of my work. And now it's a little trickier, or it was until they went back to school again. So yeah, I'm very blue collar. I try to write from whatever, 9 to 2 or 9 to 3. And write every day. I try to write, I don't even want to know what your word count is, I bet it's just colossal, but I try to write 1,000 words a day, and try not to get up until I've done it. And I don't check social media, and I don't Google anything. I just give that time to the book. I protect that space, and I do other things, ritual things. I light a candle to make the
I
space.
like the candle trick. That's
You
one of my favorites.
Yeah, because it's sacred space. And I think we all should do that to protect time.
Well, and if you want to be more scientific, because I got this early on at a writers conference, I did this, I attended a workshop on creativity, and you can get the conditioned response, the Pavlovian response. As you build up these little rituals, the more you do them, the more it's putting you in the writing space. And I think when you're a working
You went
mom,
to a workshop on creativity and inspiration. That's fantastic.
and don't we need more of those at writing conferences? We always talk about how to get sold. It's like, how do we come up with the words in the first place? But I digress.
No, that's it, because it's a mystery. And yet, isn't that, to me, the most interesting?
But the candle, the rituals, I think it does. It very much, again, I have a teenager as well. You need to transition from the mom, the tactical, the real world, to now I'm in my book space where I actually don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm along for the ride.
Yeah. Can you tell us just a few things about your writing routine? Just a little.
I'm like you. I prefer first thing in the morning, though I will admit I'm earlier than 9. In fact, I like to just go straight to the computer. I feel like if I
School
start,
drop off though. So school drop off, dog
yeah,
walk, and then, right? It's
yeah,
terrible.
I
I
don't,
get there earlier too.
yeah, I don't have to do the school drop off thing. My kid can drive herself at this age, but I
Well,
feel like even if I start doing laundry, things like that, I end up like tactical again, not creative. So how fast can I get the computer? Like you, I have a word count, but it's more general for the week. Some
Oh,
days are going to be good, some days are going to be bad because
right.
I'm not planning what I'm writing because I never know who did it till the very end because I wrote
I
half of it,
love
not even
it.
knowing how the crime happened. Um, I often joke, it's like I write 50 pages, maybe I keep 30, then 50, then 30. I want to be paid by the word, but that hasn't happened
Me too. When you
yet.
figure that out, I'm on board. So yeah, funny.
But
Oh, here comes
we just
Kira.
get some questions from our listeners, from readers as well.
We're just talking.
I didn't want to interrupt. I'm just back here laughing. This has been fantastic. We've got some great questions. Let's see, we have a really good question that came in from Catherine. She has a reading question, one of my favorite, a reading recommendation question to both of you. What was the last really great book that you read, maybe besides each other's? And what books made you want to become writers?
Oh my goodness. So I'm reading a book right now that's absolutely phenomenal. It's Maggie Shipstead's Great Circle, and it's on my nightstand, or I would hold it up. It's a beautiful cover. I'm sure this is on your radar. It's historical about, well, contemporary and historical, about an actress who gets a role to play a pilot that's a contemporary of Amelia Earhart's, and it's sort
Oh,
of how our lives intersect. It's beautiful, just like at the sentence level, totally stunning. Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. How about you, Lisa?
my favorite book I've read recently was The Invisible Life of Addie Laureu,
Ah, I've not read that.
which has been a big hit and it's just so thought-provoking. I mean, I loved the tension between, here you have this girl who makes a deal with basically the devil. And I think it's like 15th century France, that she will always belong to herself. She won't have to have a forced marriage, but no one will ever remember her name or who she is.
Oh,
So
wow.
it starts to make you think about what is existence? How do we know that we're on Earth? How lonely is that? And do you want to survive if you're always alone? So there's these huge, big questions in it, but also just this, she and the devil have quite the battle of wits over this deal and the fine print.
Okay, fun. Is there a book that made you want to be a writer?
The book I always remember is, I think I was 12 years old and I read MMK's The Far Pavilions, which is this 1,200-page epic, the family in India, the saga, and just, I'm a small kid, kid in small town Oregon, and just reading this historical, I love the historical sagas, I have to tell you, but this whole other world and people, and it introduced me to the full power of storytelling and words to transport us.
Yeah. I think I had that experience too, although not with that book. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, or
Ah,
Member of the Wedding, or The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. It's those books that were beautifully written, but also showed me at the center a heroine who was a little like me, who was struggling, but also resilient. I wanted to find a model for how to get out of my life alive, and all of that, right? And the power of language to transport us, yes, to another world, but the power of language to help us survive the world we're in, right?
excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such great recommendations. I actually just finished the Addie Laureu book, so ditto on that recommendation. And Great Circle is now going on my holds list. So.
Yeah.
I actually had a question of my own about research. So as a librarian, I adore research, but I think there's like the rabbit hole problem, right? Right? You can like get so deep into research that you can be almost overwhelmed. How do you both, as researchers, preparing no one to stop, no one to say, okay, like I've got enough. Now I switch to writing.
Well, for me, it's about not researching the book before I write it. I
Oh,
know writers who, my friend Christina Baker Klein, for instance, brilliant writer, beautiful writer, but she doesn't write until she plants all the seeds and she has her note cards and she builds the book around her. Amor Tolls is the same way, sort of plans the book out in his mind. And I don't do the research until I need to know what I need to know, and then I find it, and then I knit it into the book, and it's wildly inefficient. But there isn't the rabbit hole problem where I insist on some little detail, the way a button looks, or the bridge of a ship, or something. Do you know what I mean? That can
yeah.
just make you crazy, and then you forget what the story is about, which is about someone's heart and mind and soul, and not like a button or the bridge of a ship.
So I have to do my research, or I generally do my research in advance. Sometimes something will come up. Particularly in the beginning of my career, I had the rabbit hole problem. I mean, what is it? The Hemingway thing, you have to learn the iceberg to write the tip. But to be honest, at a certain point, those icebergs can get really, really big. And
Yeah,
you can end up,
yeah,
if you're a writer under deadline, they're just win all your writing time. I
yeah.
will say with experience, I've gotten a better sense of what are the kinds of details that really will matter, because you want the realistic level of details. But I think, and especially the books that you and I are writing, Paula, you want the characters to come through. People aren't reading these for the latest forensic development.
Mhm.
I do spend a lot of time with real world experts, not because I'm going to bring all of that into the novel, but because that just even talking to them, learning what a real search dog handler does or learning what a real detective does kind of just helps actually inspire the story for me.
Mhm.
And I like talking to people who have real jobs other than us who sit around and make things up all the time. There's that too.
Let's see, I have a question from Danielle. She says, it was extremely touching. This is for Paula. When Anna says thank you to Hat for being her tallest and straightest tree. He
That
is
was
such a wonderful character. She wants to know, did you base him off of anyone in your life that you've come across, or was he completely a fictional creation?
Um, what a great question, and thanks for mentioning that line. That line matters to me a lot too, and I love him as a character. What I did for Anna essentially was to give her the father that I never had. You know, that Hap is becomes her North Star and the person that she trusts most in the world. And I didn't have that, so I wanted Anna to have it. And his voice, when it came to me, kind of also sounded a little like the best of Sam Elliott, like the big, the
absolutely.
Western figure, right? He is that. He's the tallest tree she's ever known, and straight and tall and true and just good people. And yeah, I love him.
You had something else in the book I thought was really beautiful, and I think so many people it resonates for what we're all have been going through as a world for the past year, which is for Anna, and it's advice of a therapist to build a house in her mind,
Mm.
populate it with all the people that she has lost, and give them the safe place. Give the child inside her a safe place. And I found that imagery just so rich and powerful, because I think there's so many people right now
Thank you.
grappling with loss, and that idea that
So,
you can create.
yeah, thank you. Do you want to know a secret?
Yes.
That's something a therapist told me once.
Oh, good. I'm hoping it works. Tell me it works.
Build a house in your mind. It's a healing exercise,
Yeah.
right? Healing story.
Yeah.
Build a house in your mind and fill it full of all the people you couldn't save, or right,
Yeah.
that you left behind. And then she tells her, the therapist tells her, and when you're done and you have it pictured perfectly in your mind and you can return there anytime, then also let your child self come in. make
Yeah.
room for that person too. And that's, yeah, an important message. Yeah.
Ooh, that's powerful. I have a question from Jane about circling the sun. She wants to know, did you have an opportunity when working on that to visit Kenya? You described the area so well. We read it for our book club, and one of the members had camped in Kenya and was very complimentary about your descriptions of the land.
Oh, yeah, that's really fun. So I did my launch event for Circling the Sun in Darien, and it was just a really wild event and lovely. But two of the people I think who showed up at that event had been in Kenya with me on a safari trip, not with me, but I met them and they also happen to live in Darien. So I just think that's just so fun. But yes, I traveled to Kenya. I wrote a piece for Town and Country that was essentially following in the footsteps of Beryl Markham. So I was able to go. In fact, I stayed in the house that her father built for her when she was 14 years old. I went horseback riding in the bush. I went up in an open air biplane, vintage biplane,
Oh, wow.
flying over giraffes on the savannah. And it was absolutely the coolest thing I have ever done. And really one of the most magical experiences of my entire life. I mean, and it meant so much too that I was there because I had written into the life of this character. It was sort of like how my story, because she's a real person, right? And I also invented her. It's like how my story meets her story in space and time. It's beautiful. It was really beautiful.
Fascinating. This is for Lisa. Kristen Jordan says, first, I really enjoy your books, and I am proud that I was in your high school English class. What drove you? And she wants to know what drove you to become interested in crime fiction.
I'm going to blame my 102-year-old grandma, which is she's always been a huge fan of Earl Stanley Gardner, who those of you may know actually is the author of Perry Mason, who's one of our first legal thriller authors. So she's gifted them to me now, but when we were in her little farmhouse, my grandparents are dairy farmers, those were the books. So that's what we read again and again and again. I've probably read the Earl Stanley books, each one about 20 times, because when we went to grandma's house, that was our reading. And my whole family now, we're just obsessed with crime. I think we're ready to take the stand. We're ready to solve the case. We're on this,
And it looks like we're at 8 o'clock. So my last question for two of you, and I know some people have asked this too. What's next for each of you? I know Paula, you were in the middle of your book tour, but if you've begun thinking about your next work, what's on the horizon? And you too, Lisa, what can we expect? And
I want Paula's answer, because this book, there could be more. I'm just kind of curious where you're going to go with this.
Yeah, so there could be more to this book. I definitely left some doors open and a window or two as well. And partly it's because I became so invested in this world. I became so invested in these characters, which feel like real characters. And this detective who I became close with in the researching of this book said the most flattering thing to me once. We had a call scheduled and I got on the phone. She's like, okay. So I was riding my bike today and I was thinking about Anna. And I think she has more work to do in the world.
Nice.
And I thought, okay, so that's a benediction, right? Maybe. And so I'm letting myself play with that as a possibility. Maybe Anna has more work to do in the world. So Lisa, what are you working on?
Well, so it's interesting. Before She Disappeared was supposed to be what we call a standalone, a one-off book. I mean, I've generally written about a Boston detective, Dee Dee Warren, an FBI profiler, a vigilante, Flora Dane. But then I got the idea for this very real world thing of everyday people getting committed to trying to solve cold cases. So I'm like, oh, I'll write this Frankie Elkin book. Well, I mean, it turned out that that's been so well received. I'm writing the next one, and apparently I failed at standalones. And I'm just going to be a series author now. So this is the beginning of the new series.
A lot of people will be really happy to know that. So congratulations. And Really, you've written a wonderful book, and you were delightful to
This
talk.
was so much fun.
Absolutely delightful. So
I do appreciate our libraries and Zoom bringing authors together, because it's not every day we get to sit around and talk shop and rave about all the fictional voices in our head. And what a blast. Thank you, everyone.
yeah.
Oh, thank you both. This was such a great discussion and conversation. You've been so generous with your thoughts and time. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate you spending the evening with us. And thanks again to Barrett Bookstore, our fantastic co-sponsor in this event.
Barrett.
We
Thank you,
love
Barrett.
our independent bookstores.
Of our
Give
indie
them a
bookstores. We just celebrated National Independent Bookstore Day.
Right.
So yeah,
Amazing.
really important to have their support and the support of libraries. So thank you. And thanks for everyone at home tuning in. And Lisa, one day I hope we meet in person. I would love that.
You have to look forward to future meetings.
That's right. Well, we would love to have both of you here in person at Darien Library anytime. So we'll stay in touch. Good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Good night,
Happy
everyone.
reading.
Thank you. Bye.